Well, good morning, gardeners and homesteaders. Welcome back to Sandy Bottom Homestead. And I've got a couple things going on here. I've gotten a lot of comments and questions about heat for seed starting and seedlings. And so I want to go over that today. And basically, we're going to talk about what needs heat, what doesn't need heat, and how to think about it. So in the future, if you have, because I can't go over every single plant, but in general, like, this will kind of get you in the right direction. And I mean, after that's said and done, after you watch this and you're like, hey, I got my information, good, you can leave, you can stay. And I'm going to take you around the garden and just show you how we did through our big freeze for the year. Not that it's the last freeze, but this was a fairly significant one. So we'll do that as well. I'd say it was cold though. We still got a good chunk of ice in here. It's been frozen for a couple days. So yeah, it was cold. And that's something that really led me to talk about this today was, what are we going to do, when you go to start seedlings, what do we add heat to? Because you don't just put heat to everything. Trust me. I mean, you can, and there's multiple levels of this. So the first thing off the bat is there's multiple kinds of heat mats. And at some point during the video, I will take you inside and show you what's going on my seed shelf, because I do have some on and off heat. But there's two kinds of seed mats, two classifications. There's cheap ones and then there's expensive ones. The cheap ones basically turn on, they put out heat, and it's unregulated, so you don't really know how much heat it's getting. And then the other ones are expensive, but they have thermostats, you can control it, they have probes, all that stuff. And you can get into like temperature probes for your soil, so you can get the germination temperatures down and all that stuff. That's way above my pay grade, man. I don't make enough money to do that. And be honest, I don't need it. I've been using the same seed mats for 4 years now, 5 years, and it's worked great. And they were just basic seed mats. They're in the Amazon link below with all my seed starting stuff that you can see. Those are the ones that I use, and I got them in a 2-pack. I got 3 seed mats. And this is, once I learned this, I knew that I didn't have to have seed mat for every single thing, and then I could just kind of rotate them out. And the way that you start seeds, it kind of works out really good. When you think about it, you think about when you're supposed to be planting stuff, and not everything gets planted and started at the same time. I want to be clear about this again, and I feel like I need to keep saying this because, first of all, we don't know if somebody's new, and some people, like, I needed it drilled in my head at first too. We should not be starting cabbages and tomatoes on the same day. And they should not be planted on the same day. So there's an order in which it goes, and they like the cold weather, like cabbages, brassicas, which are, broccolis, cabbages, lettuces, onions, for example. They're not brassicas, but all of these cool weather crops that we start don't need heat, just point blank. They don't need to have their soil warmed up. And if you're using the cheap mats, you could actually overheat them and cause problems. So you just want to be very careful. I had a lot of questions about what is inside of your house temperature at. So I keep my house at about somewhere between 62 and 65 degrees. Now that doesn't mean my seed shelf is that temperature, but it's around that temperature. So even if you keep your house at like 70 degrees, 72, somewhere like that, you're going to do fine with just these cold weather crops not needing any heat. And the thing is with the heat is that some plants require it, but some plants, they can benefit from it if it's the right amount and cause it to germinate faster. And so sometimes when I start seeds outside for fall, they'll germinate in a day, where they'll take 7 days inside. But that's okay if they take 7 days inside, because I'm not in a huge rush. I'm gonna take you inside and show you my seed shelf right now and what's going on there. We're currently hardening off some more plants. So we have cabbages and broccolis hardening off at this point. I'm in coastal North Carolina. A couple days ago, it was 16 degrees, and now it's, well, now that the sun's out, it's probably about 64. I do need to take my toboggan off. And yes, it's not a sled, it's a toboggan. Shout out if you know what that means. But the plants that I do not use heat for are, and I'm gonna run for the plants that I grow that I don't use any heat for, in order, are onions, cabbages, lettuce, broccoli, kale, mustard greens, collard greens. rutabagas, Brussels sprouts, spinach, and there's one more that I'm drawing a blank on. But those are the ones, I can't remember off the top of my head, but those are the ones that I don't use heat for. All right, so for instance, so these golden acre cabbages are left over. They're growing a lot slower. They are an heirloom variety, but I did not use any kind of heat for those whatsoever. And then if we come down below, I have a tray of lettuces and Chinese cabbage. Again, no heat whatsoever. You can see we've got germination, and they actually germinated in like 3 days. And then we have some rutabagas here, which they're actually really old seeds, so I wanted to see if it would grow, and we are starting to get some germination. It's about 6 days in. So that tells me that maybe we could have gotten some used some heat on it, but overall I'm not going to use any, and it's going just fine. So we're going to put that in. And the only issue you have on a side note is, you see right there, that's a little close. The electric is a little close to the watering, so I need to rework that to some extent. I need to figure that I don't like that, but I'll have to see how that goes. So over here we've got peppers. I just started these seeds yesterday, so they're not germinated at all. But you see how it's sweating on here? That's the heat that we put on the germination heat mat that we're using. And so I have my tray is in another tray, and then underneath I have my heat mat. Now, 2 things are providing heat on here. One is the heat mat, and 2, the light actually gives a little bit of heat off as well. So this raises the temperature in here, and what I do is, if you look up, you can see I've got it balled up right now, but I pull this down over. It's just a tablecloth that comes down, and it'll kind of hold in a little bit more of that heat. So we do use that. And again, these are in the these heat mats. Let me see if I can pull it out real quick. Well, I'll just lift the tray up for you. Yeah, you're not going to be able to see it. But here's an extra one that I have. So it's an Intertech heat mat. This is basically the same thing, and it's just one temperature from what I can tell. Now, the reason why I put it underneath here is so it gives a little bit extra barrier to the plant, and it's not just totally blasting it. But you have to think, these peppers grow in the heat. They need heat to grow. And just to go over to the varieties real quick, we've got a lot of peppers going. So each one of these holds 50 seeds, and we've got 100 seed cells going. So we've got lemon peppers, Megatron jalapenos, King Arthur bell peppers, mango bell peppers, or mango hot peppers, and peach peppers. So, and all of these will be growing in here. We'll leave the heat on here for a while, at least through germination. And then once we get through the germination period and they start getting comfortable, we will remove the heat from them. At that point, I mean, you got to think, throughout this time of year, you've got a couple things going on. One, you've got the heat in your house going, but also the temperature outside's warming up, so naturally your house is going to get a little warmer. You're also going to be running more lights, so you're going to get more and more of that heat coming in, ambient temperature that will help with the germination. Now, I've done all this. I've grown everything in my garden without heat before, added heat for germination, and I've been successful. But using a cheap heat mat like that definitely makes a difference in the germination rate for these heat-loving crops. And so these heat-loving crops that I think really need to consider using heat for are peppers, tomatoes, eggplants. You can even get in, when you start getting into melons and squashes and stuff like that, if you want to try and start seeds for those work really good for that. And some flowers as well. Some flowers don't need it. Some flowers, it just doesn't help. But that's really very particular per different flowers and stuff like that. So I can't really get too much into that. And plus, I'm a really bad flower grower, to be truthful, but that's just how it is. So, you start doing, if you think about it, anything that doesn't like to grow in the cold or is not frost hardy, you should be adding heat to. And just remember, get those cheap heat mats, and just think about in your head, when things are naturally growing. And if you don't know, then you need to go to the drawing board, you need to look it up, and you need to read a little bit about it. And that's going to make a big difference, because once you learn what different crops like and when you should actually be planting them, that's going to help you make the decision on when to use heat and when not to use heat. But you do not need to add heat for every single plant that you grow. That is a big misconception. Sometimes the ambient temperature in your house is just enough, and you can just, you know, some things like spinach, for example, it will not germinate if it's too hot. And because I'm using the cheap heat mats that do not have the thermostat, and don't even try and convince me in the comments to use one, because I'm not going to buy it, because I'm happy with what I'm using, they won't germinate. So I just do it this way, and it works out great. For those of you that care enough about what's going on in my garden through the frost, I'll show you exactly what happened here. We cleared this bed out completely. So this bed is done for about a month until we put our taters in. So we're just gonna work this bed, turn it, and then let it sit. We did cover our Brussels sprouts, but I loosely covered them. I mean, look, I wasn't gonna go out and quickly build another low tunnel. So I used a low tunnel off of another bed that's smaller. So it was higher. The plastic was cut, but it was cut too short. So there's like big gaps in it on the sides. But what it did is it allowed the frost not to settle and get really, really cold on top of that plant. And from what I can tell, we didn't have any losses. So we got down to, I think it was 14 degrees I saw. And we didn't have any losses at all for this. So this was really nice, at least as of yet. And I think we're pretty good. You can see like these leaves here were actually laid on the plastic did get a little burned, but it's not the end of the world. And I mean, this one has Brussels sprouts on it. That one may be a little bit soft, but we're gonna let it roll and see what happens. I knew I was gonna cover that one, even though I didn't think I did. But because I've tried so long and so hard to get Brussels sprouts, I didn't want to let everything go to waste. So we knew we were gonna do that. I didn't have any more plastic that I was willing to cut for this bed. What I'm probably gonna do in the future is make more low tunnels just to kind of keep on hand. But the cabbage bed did fine. I'll show you what I used to cover it. I don't have any damage here whatsoever. I did put this pole in, and then I have this camping tarp that I use. And actually I keep it in my truck for emergencies, and I just pulled this over. So it just kind of just over it, left it on there. And I left it on there overnight and then through most of the first day. And then the second day we weren't supposed to get as cold, and we got almost just as cold. So the next day I just left it on all day and let that heat build up in it. And everything seems to have recovered fine, because remember, I did that video, and you should watch it if you haven't, that it doesn't matter how warm you keep your plants at night necessarily. And I mean, we're not talking repeated over and over freezes, but what it is the recovery time during the day. And I am all tangled up in this tarp right now. This is ridiculous. So it kind of worked out good. Now I did cover my onions. I wasn't going to, but I saw that it was getting cold, and I saw how fast the temperature was dropping. So I moved the low tunnel from the lettuce bed to the onion bed, and I have not looked in it yet. I just wanted to be safe because we were starting to get some good growth, and I wanted to stay on top of it. So let's see what it looks like underneath. Sometimes it's just better off safe than sorry. And to be honest, I probably won't need to cover this up anymore, but because we had what we had, it was just worth it. I didn't want to kind of put myself in a position where I felt like I needed to start over at all. So it does need some water, which is good. We're actually gonna get some rain. And to be truthful, I have onions planted or garlic planted in here too, and I would not cover that. But it looks as if we had 0 losses here, which is very good. I'm very happy about that. Get this pine cone out of here. So yeah, that's a good result. They were predicting us to get down to 19, and I have a thermometer in my house for outside. And as I was watching the temperature drop more and more, I just knew that it was just gonna break through that. I mean, it was like 8 o'clock at night and it was already 22. And I'm like, there's no way, because the weather just wasn't moving in that way. There was no warm front behind it that was going to warm it up during the night. So I knew that there was going to be an issue. So we did all that. Oh, and let me show you the kale that was completely uncovered. It's completely uncovered and A-okay. No burn or nothing. Now it did look pretty pitiful, but it's rebounded just fine and came up, and we took that whole row of bok choy out ahead of time, so we didn't have to worry about that. I'm pretty sure most of the country went through this cold, so let us know how your gardens fared through the cold, or how your seed starting's going through this cold period we just went through. I'm curious to know what you guys did and how everything survived, because I truly do hope that your gardens are starting to wake up and your gardening mind is starting to wake up and get prepared for the season, because it's quickly upon us. Greenhouse we buttoned up nice and good, and I moved all the seedlings in, so I do want to take a peek at these. And I haven't even looked at them because basically I didn't want to worry myself over it during the cold. Greenhouse looks good. We got our onions, they did fine. And these, so these cabbages here, they actually, this is, the discoloration from is burned from the cold, but it's not from this cold. That was a boo-boo I made. I like to push the limits and see what I can get away with. And each year, because our weather is so variable, I'm in a heartbreak zone is what I like to call it. So, you know, it'd be like it is now, 19 degrees 2 days ago, 14 degrees, and 65, I think it may, now that the sun's out, be 70 degrees. And so we have this back and forth. So I got those are my first rounds of cabbages that I put out, and they were doing very well. But we had a cold one night that wasn't, it was supposed to get to like 29 and ended up getting to like 24, and that burned them. So what I'll do is I'm going to keep them warm, and I'm going to feed them to push new growth on them. And that should help to kind of help them rebound. And I'm just going to have to keep an eye on them. We're not pressed for time right now. We are ahead of schedule. So I'm not overly concerned about getting them in the ground. I still have time in which I can get them going. And with this warm weather, I can move them outside. And we've got like 10 days of like fairly decent weather where it's not going to get below freezing at least. And that'll help them rebound quickly, hopefully. We'll see. But if you don't take a chance, you're not going to know. And that's the biggest thing, is sometimes you just got to take a chance and just understand that you're going to have losses.